Hey, we are starting a new series as we are journeying through Second Corinthians. And this is what we call in the New Testament portion of our Bible, which is the time of Christ forward. And this is after Christ's ascension and his death, burial, and resurrection, in other words. And the church is now beginning to blossom. There's an apostle named Paul who has gone out and done many different church plants. He was an early missionary that go from place to place, planting churches. And then he would write what is called epistles, which is where we get Second Corinthians, we get First Corinthians, we get numerous other books which are letters. The epistles are letters that he would send to support, to encourage, that then God would use, and they would share these from church to church to church. So that's kind of a quick snapshot of what we're getting ready to jump into. Now, the series title, Check Your Heart. Some of you might go, okay, what's that about? Well, let me ask for a little bit of help from a comedian, Christian comedian, John Crist. I'll let him share.
Me and my buddy Caleb used to say this to each other all the time. It's like the Christian way of telling somebody that you're judging them, but like inside, you're not just gonna say it out loud. It's like, you ever seen somebody making a questionable decision? You're just like, check your heart. Okay. Very applicable in all types of situations. Oh, you're gonna get an extra value meal and an apple pie, but you're still not gonna donate $1 to charity? Okay. Check your heart. Oh, y'all have been at Chipotle. Let me just get a water. No, I'm fine. Let me just get water. Sneak that thing. Fill it up with Sprite. Yeah. Check your heart. I got one. How about, oh, you're going to open your car door and ding the car next to you? You're not going to leave a note? Okay. Check your heart. And the self-checkout at the grocery store skips an item, but you just bag it and keep going. That's excellent. Check your heart. What about when you go to the early service or maybe go to the night service at church so you can watch the game? Wow. Check your heart. What about when you see a meme on the internet that's a little bit inappropriate, so you don't tag your friend, you just screenshot it and text it to him? Wow. Everybody's done that. Also, check your heart.
Oh, if you're already thinking about lunch and making sure you're in the line before others and you're tuning out of the sermon, check your heart. You know, hey, let's tune in for a second. Let's talk about Second Corinthians. See, they were a church that had a lot of trouble. They had a lot of difficulty, and they needed to check their heart. Paul had what was called a painful visit. That doesn't sound fun. If you would describe a discussion with a friend or a mentor or your parents and it's painful, that's kind of what happened. He had some division and immorality that he was addressing. There was disunity within the church and a tremendous amount of immorality. See, here's what happens. In a society where there is much blessing and much affluence comes much problem. See, when it comes down to it, Corinth, the town in which the Corinthian church was in, it's very similar to the United States in that it was a very powerful trade route. There was a lot of money that run. There was a lot of affluence. And with a lot of affluence becomes a lot of opportunity and problem and self-sufficiency and carnality and sin. And so it was running rampant within the church. And Paul sends Timothy and Titus, two of his trusted co-workers, to try and help with this. And finally, things start to get better. And then Paul writes the book, Second Corinthians, to encourage the church to remain faithful, especially during difficult times. You know, it's one thing to say, hey, everything's good when you're up on the mountaintop. But when you're in the valley, that's when we find out, is it real? So I want to talk a little bit about the valley actually today and this God we worship called comfort. See, we do anything and everything to avoid discomfort. And I want to just challenge you for a moment. Would you put on your thinking cap and listen to an old saying that was really challenging me to this week. But if you just listen to it, think about the words to get the meaning. It's this. Two men looked out from prison bars. The one saw mud, the other stars. What's the difference? See, the idea is same prison, same window, looking out. One sees mud, one sees stars. It's the perspective. See, what happens in life is there are times in which you get so down and frustrated and you've lost hope, and you start to look down, and all you're going to see is mud. You're going to see a messy, ugly, messy life. You're going to see a hopeless life. You're going to see problems. You're going to see hurt. You're going to see bitterness because you're looking down, and that's your perspective. And when the exact same situation might be with another person standing in your shoes, and they actually look up and they see stars and they see hope, and they're in the same mess and they're in the same problem, and yet they see something that is down the road that is potential, and they see hope and they see beauty because their perspective is different. And I hate that truth when it applies to me. And I realize my perspective is mud rather than stars. So let's talk about perspective, because perspective is going to choose whether you see despair or hope. And what is it that you see when you look at the world? Do you look at the world and you go, okay, yeah, I look around and man, there's so much mess, and there's so much hurt, and there's so much ugliness, and there's so much division, and there's just so many stupid things that are out there that I just, do you start to rant? What are you looking? What are you looking at? Where's your perspective? Or do you look at the same world that I look at and others look at, and do you see, wow, there's so much potential now? You know, and you might be going, there's some hard stuff, there's some bad things going on, but you know, there's some potential for some awesome, and I know God's going to be faithful, and we're going to work through. See, it's amazing you can put two people in the same situation and have a complete different perspective. See, perspective, well, it reveals much of your heart. You know, we all have two common needs, forgiveness and comfort. Let me break it down just a little further. Every one of us have sinned, we've fallen short, we've done dumb. All of us have this thing called sin in our life. We're affected by other sin, we have our own sin, we live in a fallen world. We need this thing called grace. Forgiveness is so important. I need it, you need it, all of us do. We also have this thing called comfort that's important, where we need peace, encouragement, and peace in the midst of the storm, because all of us have something else in common. Suffering, hardship, hurt, pain. You're going to face it in life. It's a part of this world. It can destroy you, or you can actually propel you. There are two ways of how you respond to it. And that's what I want to talk about today, because God so doesn't want the storm to crush you. He wants to walk through that. See, we're all going to face it. We're all going to need forgiveness in life, and we're all going to need comfort. Will you turn to him, or will you run from him when it happens? The Bible tells us this in our text. I'm going to start in verse 5 of chapter 1. It says, for the more we suffer for Christ, the more God will shower us with his comfort through Christ. The Bible actually says Jesus, in his own words, promised us, in this world you'll have trouble. He says, but take heart, I've overcome, that this isn't the end, that there's more yet to come. And see, the closer you follow God, the closer your walk starts to emulate Jesus Christ. Actually, sometimes the more discomfort starts to go up. You go, what? Well, yeah, because you know what culture teaches? Culture teaches some things that are just plain wrong. And when you start to learn truth, all of a sudden you start to struggle with the lie that you've been fed. See, culture will teach you that every bad thing in this world that happens to you is it's wrong. You need to avoid it at all costs. Suffering, hardship, persecution, difficulty, facing struggling relationships, or whatever it might be. Oh, that's bad. Well, we've all perpetuated this. I get this as a parent. What parent wouldn't want the noble motivation of helping their children avoid every bit of suffering and pain? Of course we want to do that. Hey, I don't want my kids to ever go through anything dangerous or hurtful. I don't want anybody, and you know, it used to be the helicopter parents that talk about you're just always hovering and always watching and always involved. And now we have lawnmower parents where you mow down the opposition of your children and get out of their way. And nothing is going to harm my kid. Get out of their way. And that is society. And you know what the results are? Now we have kids who've grown into adults, and they're ones who've never faced hardship. They've never had to really work like the last generation maybe. They haven't faced the hurt and the pain and the suffering that's a part of life. And so then when it hits them, we've all bought into this lie. We're like, I have marriage problems. I married the wrong person. No, everybody has marriage problems. I have kids and they're not perfect. What do I do? Well, of course they're not perfect. You have a job and a boss tells you what to do and says do it or you lose your job. And I struggle with this. Just here's the truth. Not everybody gets a trophy in life. And I'm sorry. Sometimes life hurts. And I wish that I could take the pain away for every person in this room of whatever you're facing. God has said, you know what? I love you enough to let you learn from this and grow through this. And I promise you this, I will never leave you. I'll never forsake you. I'll walk through this hell with you. He does not abandon us. But there's this lie that we struggle with. Saying, it's bad. And he's like, no. What's bad is being separate from me. He says, here's the Bible. Remember, truth has a way of just being true. It's something I say a lot around here, and I don't like the truth sometimes, but even if I don't like the truth, that has nothing to do with whether it's true. Truth is just truth. And so we have to accept truth for what it is. The Bible teaches that from the very beginning that suffering is a part of this world. It's a fallen world from Adam and Eve on. You see the creation story in Genesis at the beginning of the Bible where you see sin enter into the world. You go from the Garden of Eden, you have the curse that comes upon, there's struggle, there's strife, there's disease now, there's death, there's all this other stuff. And that continues all the way, even when we get to the New Testament times, which is when Jesus, God becomes man, enters into the world. And we have another picture, but it was even prophesied of him and held true that he was lonely, rejected, acquainted with grief. He suffered. It was Jesus, God himself. Peter, one of his closest disciples, one of the inner three that he would work with, said, don't be surprised at what is happening to you. When it comes to these trials, don't be surprised. It's not strange. And Paul, the author of 2 Corinthians, who went out and did so much to plant churches, he suffered to the point that he thought he was going to die. Verse 8 says, we think you ought to know, dear brothers and sisters, about the trouble we went through in the province of Asia. We were crushed and overwhelmed beyond our ability to endure, and we thought we would never live through it. Crushed, overwhelmed, sure to die. We're not the only ones with stress. Hey, you go back 2,000 years ago, I can't even fathom what Paul went through. Every generation tends to think they have the hardest. The modern generation right now is going, oh man, you don't know what we're dealing with. And you're right, I don't. But you know what? You don't know what I dealt with. I also have no clue what all my dad went through and my mom went through and some of the struggles they had. The generation before them, the struggles that they had and the less technology and the less medical help and all the other things and the hard work that they had to put in. And the generation before that dealt with things that I can't even fathom and the division and wars and other stuff. Every generation the very beginning of Adam and Eve through today has dealt with pressure that is beyond what they could handle. That's something we have in common. And I'm so thankful we have a God who says, I'll walk through it with you. Over 30 years of ministry of seeing individuals and families and deal with loss, hurt, pain. There's one thing I often see really in common is, if not careful, we start to just feel like we're the only ones. I'm the only one who's gone through this. No one else gets what I've been through, and we don't realize how many others are out there as well. And then we start to believe a lie that, well, the Bible tells us that God won't give us more than what we can handle. What Bible are you reading? He says, in this world, you will have trouble. He says, suffering is a part of this life. It's time and time. 11 of the 12 disciples, only one lived to an old age and it was on an island in prison. That's a part of this world. And I know that there's this whole wealth, health, and just this idea that if you follow God, God's going to bless you and take care of you, that is being taught, and it is a lie. He is going to care for us, but he's not going to do it always here on earth. He will walk through anything here. Heaven is heaven. Don't make earth into heaven. Don't try and put the things that are yet to come on this one little dot on the map. This is just the beginning. It's preparation for eternity. And when you get that expectation messed up in your head, that's a lie that Satan uses to distance you from God, to distance you from others, to make you dissatisfied, to get you angry. See, our response has an ability to propel us forward where we reach out for help, or to close us off and to become bitter. I can choose to be negative, or I can choose to be positive. Let me just be honest. One of the things that I struggle with, I think we all struggle with, it's human nature, is the blame game. It's not my fault. I am hurting them in pain. This bad stuff is happening. It's not my fault. It's God's fault, or it's your fault, or it's her fault. It's my wife's fault. It's my kid's fault. It's somebody's fault, but it's not my fault. And even when it's something that I've chosen, lifestyle or personal choice, I still can have a way of blaming others around me. And that is a part of our society that is within you. So let me just talk about something that the Bible discusses, and it's something that is kind of painful, and it's called discipline. God's love for his children is going to result in discipline. There is consequence to our actions. And not always is it going to be our fault, but some of the time it is. There are times in my life when I have made choices to go in a route that was not following God's path, and as a result, I dealt with the consequences of my action, and that is then painful. And it's a part of his love for me to help straighten out my path and to help me follow. Now, not everything is. There's this thing called free will, and I'm just going to touch on something that people have written books on. And so there's this thing called free will, and here's the thing. You have the right to do something that might affect me. I have the right to do something that might affect you. Nobody wants to be a robot. We all agree on that. But we kind of want everybody else to be a robot, and I want free will. I want free will, but I really don't want you to have free will, because if you do something that hurts me, that's really not fair. And God says as part of a fallen world, and free will is that we do have bad things happen, where a drunk driver does make a bad choice and they live with the consequences, and so do the victims around them. Sometimes so does the family. And now we have hurt and we have pain. And we have nature that sometimes has accidents, and sometimes this bad things happen to good people, and this isn't the final resting place. So we kind of struggle and we blame, and then we go from there right into a struggle with our egos, where we say, okay, I'm not sure if he's in control, but I'm going to make sure that I'm in control. And we become self-reliant, where I just try and make more money. I try and get more education. I'll go to the right doctor. I'll get whatever medicine I can. I'm going to make sure that whatever it is, I'm going to try and keep it within my control so that I don't have to suffer in any way. And the end result is actually a religion that we don't realize we've developed and walked right into. It's called humanism, where I don't need God anymore. I just need me. And that's a dangerous place to be. That's where the Corinthian church was. That's kind of where the American society and churches are today, where we just try and take care of ourselves. And Paul tells us today, in fact, we expected to die, but as a result, we stopped relying. Don't miss this. We stopped relying. Let me say it again. We stopped relying on ourselves and learned to rely only on God, who raises the dead. Most believers will sooner or later get to a point where they realize the foundation they're on in a relationship when they hit rough times. You know, a marriage is defined often by what they've gone through in terms of bad, not what they've gone through in terms of good. When you hurt and you get to that struggle and you're not sure, because when they say I do, let's just put it this way. Oh, I love you and I'm going to be there for you and I'm never going to leave you, and it's the good and the bad. Well, you don't really know that's true until you hit the bad. And you hope that it is, but that's when it becomes real. The relationship becomes solid and you go, wow, I just went through hell and they stood by my side and I can trust them. You know, it's when your kids go through rough times and they fall and they scrape their knee and then mom is there, dad is there, that they start to go, wow, this love that they have is genuine, it's sincere, it's deep, and I can count on mom and dad. And the same thing happens with God. We find out that he really is real. Our relationship becomes real. Our God becomes real when we face hardship. Paul was forced to utterly depend upon God because he had nothing left other than him. Please, could I challenge you to learn to rely on God, not yourself, and stop blaming, but just say, I'm going to rely on you. Rather than resent God, I'm going to rely on God. Turn to God rather than run away from God. You know, the Old Testament tells a story of Job who went through hell on earth, lost everything, went through all kinds of stuff. And yet at the very end, what he really learned was that God was faithful and by his side through the whole thing. Paul went through thing after thing after thing. He was shipwrecked. He was beaten. He was hurt. He had a price on his head, all kinds of stuff. And yet what he found out is that God was faithful. He'd never leave him, and he was always by his side. And the more that they relied on him, the more they realized the love of God. And their confidence became solid. Pastor James Vernon McGee, he's an old-time pastor. Let me tell you just a quick story that he tells on himself. And this is in a generation past that it's not PC to consider this anymore, but it's okay. Just don't get lost in the PC side. Let's just understand the story. And so James Vernon McGee, he was a good kid. He didn't really ever get in trouble, but he had some friends, and they talked him in to say, hey, let's go fishing. Let's skip school. And so they all played hooky on school. They went fishing, and the principal found out, and he calls them in. He's like, boys, I know you skipped school and you went fishing. I'm going to whip every one of you. And he's like, I know I've been in trouble. And he was scared to death. And one of the more experienced boys, in other words, a kid had gotten in a lot of trouble and was used to this kind of thing. He's like, hey, James, it's okay. He says, don't run because he'll wear you out. I get this idea of chasing the boy around the office. You come here, whack, whack. And he's like, don't run. He'll wear you out. And he says, and I know it's going to sound strange, but as he starts to whip you, move towards him. Because when you move towards him, it takes his leverage away and it won't hurt as bad. So there's your lesson for today. James McGee said it was one of the best lessons he ever learned in life is to move towards the pain and don't run away during the pain. Let that sink in for a second. What happens when we have suffering or hardship enter into our life? What do we do with people? We start to push them away. What do we do with God? We start to push them away. We start to go inside our stuff. We start to put up our walls. We start to get all tense. And then we go, nobody cares about me, and yet we're the one that has pushed them away if not careful. I've done that. Would you please just instead scoot towards a little bit? You scoot towards God. You press in and not pull away. See, here is the incredible result that happens from this. Growth begins to occur during pain, and God brings out some awesome things if you'll let it. First of all, it starts with compassion. You know, who's the best person to help somebody in depression? It's somebody who's been there, done that, feels it, knows what we're talking about, where they can feel and empathize with what they're doing. Who's the best person to help somebody who is an alcoholic? Every recovery ministry understands this. It's the person who was an alcoholic, went through that, survived it, and now has come out on the other side and gone back to help the next person who's drowning. I mean, every different hardship or hurt. This is a principle to hold on to. When Paul wrote this, he says, all praise to God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. God is our merciful Father. And what? He's the source of all comfort. God displayed his compassion in Jesus Christ when God became man so that he could feel what we feel, experience what we feel, and know what we know. And he became man that he might know your hurt and pain as well. And he endured all of that and revealed his compassion and the depth of his love through the cross. Do you realize the words comfort or comforting are used 31 times in the New Testament? 10 of them are in this short passage. This is a big deal. In other words, when it comes back to, God is saying he is the source of comfort himself. There's a difference between, though, just compassion, which is a very American thing. We see the commercials and we go, oh, I just heard from, they're going through a rough time. Oh, I feel for you. And yet we don't do anything. We're of no earthly good just feeling compassion. I'm not saying compassion's a bad thing. It's good, but compassion moved to action is better. That's what comfort is. So let's look at comfort. Compassion has to do with understanding, but you can be sympathetic and useless. Just to be blunt, you can be. Hey, okay, you can cry for me, but how about help me? Hey, that's really what the biblical picture is. Compassion moved to action. It's like a little girl who took first aid training. She was so excited. She came home a couple of weeks afterwards and says, Mommy, I put all my first aid training to use. I got to do something I learned. And she's like, what happened? And she's like, I saw this accident and there was blood and and so I sat down on the curb and I put my head between my knees. First aid training is to see someone else's hurt and to go help them. And that's about the picture of what most of us do with compassion. We see what others are feeling. We see their pain. We see their hurt. And then we go, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm going to take care of me. We are called to go out and to make a difference. The Bible says in verse 4, he comforts us in our troubles so that we can comfort others. When they're troubled, we will be able to give them the same comfort God has given us. It's a chain reaction. Do you get that? God comforts us so that we can comfort others because we're all going to go through the same amount of kind of mess. It may be at different times in different ways, but we all experience hurt and pain, and yet together we're stronger. You know, this word comfort means to come alongside. It's not to watch from a distance, but it's to come alongside. That's where the comfort comes in. It's to encourage, to listen, to share. You know, when my mom was dying and I was a freshman in college, I carried a little 3x5 card around for about 20 years. You know why? It's because this girl named Renee, who was an older student who had lost her mom, had gone through the same thing, had come over to me, and it had a verse from Jeremiah that she wrote down on it. And she's like, I've been through this, and I'm so sorry that you're going through it. I just want you to know I care and that you can do this. And she gave me a few pointers. Anything that had been said, if it had been said by a different person, would have been empty and hollow. Why? Because they didn't know what I'd been through and was going through and about to go through. Now, she, on the other hand, experienced it all and understood it, and so I held on to it. It meant the world to me. Allow God to use the hurts and the pain in your life to comfort others, because here's where the testimony comes in. See, God has used the life to say, let me be this message that is told through your life. You know, it's to testify as to God and who he is and is he real. See, the problem is we think of God on Sunday morning and we forget to take him Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. See, he is not just God of Sunday morning. He is God of my life. He's God of the mountaintops, but he's also God of the valley. He is God that in the good times, but he's also God in the hurt and in the pain. He wants to walk through it all. Don't you dare push him away at that point. The world is just waiting and watching. Is this God that you believe in real? Is it going to be real? Because it doesn't mean much in the good times. Oh, it's great to celebrate with him on the mountaintop, but when it's the heartache and the hurt, that's when the world says, okay, is it real? You know, author Stephen Brown writes, for every pagan who undergoes cancer, there is a Christian who goes through cancer so that the world can tell the difference. There is a spotlight on your Jesus when you get hurt and when you go through struggle. And what are you showing about the faith that you have in him? Verses 6 and 7 continue. Even when we are weighed down with troubles, it is for your comfort and salvation. For when we ourselves are comforted, we will certainly comfort you. Then you can patiently endure the same things we suffer. We are confident that you share in our sufferings. You will also share in the comfort God gives us. I read about a construction worker who was catching up at night. It was night, it was dark, it was kind of a damp night, and the metal was actually slippery that he was working on the superstructure. Shouldn't have been up there by himself, shouldn't have been there after hours, all that, I know, but he was there and trying to get caught up on some things, and he was welding. Well, what happened is the metal was slippery, and he slipped, and it was night, and he was by himself, and he fell and grabbed hold of the edge and was just holding on and screaming out for help, but the traffic noise, no one could hear him, no one else was around. He's scared to death. He was just sure he was going to die. And all of a sudden, as his grip gave out, because he had all of his gear on and all this other stuff, he could not pull himself back up. He was just hanging on, just barely. His fingers finally let go. And as he was like, I'm dead, there was scaffolding only about a foot beneath him that he couldn't see. Maybe, just maybe, the hell that you're going through, the hurt that you're experiencing, the pain that you're screaming out, going, nobody's there, why won't anybody listen, why isn't anybody there? God is ready to catch you. Feel this let go and then let yourself go into his arms. Just maybe, he wants to use that then to minister to those around you. Just maybe, would you find out today that you're not alone and you trust him at his word? See, he has promised to never leave us, never forsake us. And I fully believe it with all my heart. Here's the amazing thing. Some of you struggle with turning to a faithful God because you know you're unfaithful. Welcome to the club. I can promise you this, my God has been faithful to me and I have been unfaithful. When I've been an idiot, he's been my same God. When I've turned my back on him and gotten angry at him, or I've even cursed at him and just been furious at times in life, when I didn't understand things, he has big shoulders and he said, you're okay, you're my boy. And I don't know where you've been or what you're going through or what you're about to go through, but I do know this, we have the same God in common, and he says, you're mine. And he won't ever leave you. It's your choice. What is your perspective going to be this week? Are you going to look up and see the stars, and are you going to see a God who is faithful? Or are you going to look down at the dirt, because that's one of Satan's best lies? Would you stand with me? Let me pray. Dear Father, we come before you in the name of Jesus Christ. God, I know there are a lot of lies in the room right now, and I ask that you would just break down those lies in the hearts of those who are listening. That God, you would wrap your arms around us, that you would remind us how faithful you are even when we are not. God, for the man or the woman or the child who is listening and going, oh, there's no hope, would you lift their heart? Would you lift their eyes to the heavens, that they would look to you and not to this world? That every lie that Satan has wanted to plant, every hurt that someone else has wanted to bring into our lives, that you would turn that around for good and use it for the kingdom. It'd be one more tool that the Holy Spirit could use to bring glory to you. Oh God, I'm thankful that you never ever sleep or slumber, that you are more than enough in my life. You're more than enough in our lives. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. If you'd like to pray, we'd love to talk with you in the back right-hand corner. We have a prayer team there each and every week. Know this. God has spread his arms open wide, and he wants to wrap his arms around you. Will you let him? The stars or the mud? It's your choice.